Amitav Ghosh, thank you so much for speaking to DeKoder. Welcome to Between Us. I have to say, I had a fabulous time reading your new book, The Ghost Eye. And without giving too much of the book away, the premise is such a delicious uh, dilemma of this vegetarian family who suddenly sort of have this young girl who wants to eat fish. She keeps saying, "Give me March." And I thought, how lovely. And, especially when we're living in a time where now meat shops are being asked to shut during certain festivals, and you kind of feel certain pressures to not eat certain things and eat certain things. So speak to us about how this came about.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, Manika. It's a great pleasure to be with you. And it's very good to know that you enjoyed the book. That's, of course, always the best thing you can hear. Um, it's actually the case that, there have been many studies of reincarnation, children with past life memories in India. And it very often happens that their past life memories are associated with food. So it happened, there are any number of cases of children being born into vegetarian families and demanding to eat meat, and also of you know uh, children being born into non-vegetarian families, like farmer families and so on, and they try and make their parents give up eating meat. So this is a very common phenomenon. In Burma, there are many cases of children with past life memories of being Japanese soldiers during the Second World War. And they often insist on, a kind of Japanese diet. I mean, they reject Burmese food and insist on eating, very bland Japanese food. So it's a very common phenomenon. For me, the interest in fish arises, well, because I'm a Bengali, and what you mentioned here was also very important to me. I hate this idea of people, enforcing their sort of dietary norms on other people in various ways. Because certainly in Bengal, Bengal is a land that has known hunger for many, many times in its history. And, without fish, a very large percentage of Bengalis would just be utterly deprived of protein. So that is a very important environmental factor, if you like. It's a very large part of our Bengali life, and this is true of most coastal areas. It's true of let's say the Konkan, where I am right now in Goa. And it's true of Kerala, it's true of Tamil Nadu. I mean, naturally, if you live by the sea, fish becomes a large part of your diet.
Right. There is this one part where, again, you talk about there are certain times or certain years when time seems to speed up for India and its neighbors, as for the world, and even beyond. 1969 is one such year. And then you go on to sort of speak about Neil Armstrong and many things happening. And I thought, again, how interesting when I was reading the book, because do you feel, I kind of felt that, we're currently living in that kind of world where everything is seeming to be surreal but speeding up at the same time, whether it's global events, internal, whether you look at South Asia. Did you kind of have some sort of that feeling as you were writing this?
Yes, certainly, absolutely. I mean, I was writing this, in the post-pandemic years, and certainly the pandemic, it's going to be remembered, I think, as one of history's great inflection points. Because the world before the pandemic and the world today are almost unrecognizable. I mean, almost every kind of structure and institution that we've taken for granted is now currently just completely disintegrating. It's a very, it's a, it's one of really, I mean, to quote a great saying, which has now become almost a cliche. This is, the old world is dying and the new world has yet to be born, and in between is the time of monsters.
You've kind of sort of put it in this beautiful way, because um, it is a changing world, but it's also in so many ways. And I almost feel, we're like these old people saying this, but it's an unrecognizable world. When you come here from Brooklyn, is this really the India that you see and recognize?
Well, I'm right now in Goa, in a house that I used to live in, that I lived in for many, many years. And here in this tiny corner of India, I must say that it does remind me of the India of my childhood. And here, and I think that's one of the things that really is kind of weirdly reassuring about India, because we see the great changes that are happening in the cities, the and so on. But at the same time, one is always reminded that in a way, the presence of the state is not as encompassing in India as it is, in the West. So, that does need to be remembered, that here still in these parts of India, and actually India is largely a rural country. I mean, most people still live in the countryside. Uh, things are There's a very direct connection with the past.
Right. Another thing through the book that I felt was, in India, definitely, but even globally, is your very interesting portrayal of women, sort of both sides, so to speak, the housewife, the homemaker, the very sort of my family first, my husband, my children, and then this whole side of these women who really take control and are their own people, and you know uh, again, modeled on women, how did that come about, and was that a very conscious choice, or it suited the narrative?
Well, I suppose I'm just representing, the world I know. I mean, my mother was a homemaker at home, and her entire life was dedicated to her family, and most of all, cooking for her family. That was a very, very big part of her life. But she was a force to contend with, and many of us have those experiences with our parents, don't we?
We do. Again, another very interesting line, and I'm reading from the book. It said, it was all very confusing for a child, but Shoma, who was very good at explaining things, simplified it for me one day. Just remember, the longer the name of the party, the more radical it's likely to be. And I really want you to speak to our viewers about this.
Well, the Bengal of my childhood, especially of these years in the 60s and 70s, it was like that. I mean, there was the hammer and sickle was everywhere. There were these, actually, I've just mentioned three parties, but there were so many, uh, Communist Party offshoots. I mean, every day there seemed to be a new one I mean, even the CPI-ML split, and then there was the Charu Mazumdar faction versus the other faction. So every other day they were splitting and splitting, and they were called splitists. That was the Marxist jargon of the time. But yeah, I mean, it was an astonishing thing at the time, and I have to say that when I look back on that past now, it's kind of in some strange way almost amusing. So that's how it found its way into the book.
But tell me, when you look back at the Bengal of your growing up and the Bengal of today, tell us the one thing that's still the same, and the one thing that you cherish, and the one thing that you that's lost and gone and you wish was still there.
The Bengal of my childhood, these 1960s, 1970s, it was absolutely tumultuous. I mean, because of the politics. I mean, there was constant upheaval. I mean, really, it was every day there was a morcha or a michil or a band or something. Just as I've written. But at the same time, you know, it was culturally speaking incredibly rich and fecund. There was Satyajit Ray, there was Mrinal Sen, there was Tapan Sinha, there were great writers like Mahashweta Devi, there was Shunil Gangopadhyay, who was actually a very dear friend of mine. So, it was a time really of incredible sort of cultural ferment. I mean, Bengal was producing so many astonishing works of literature and art and so on. And, one reason for that, I think, is that, Bengal was in a state of permanent descent, if you like. Whichever way the world was going, Bengal was going in the other way, going in the other direction. And I think this, in a sense, provided us with a very particular sort of point of view on the world. Now, today's Bengal is very, very different. I mean, where there used to be, you know, uh, Marxist encampments and so on, now there are these giant malls where you can buy Western designer clothes and so on. So that has certainly changed. And I would say the aspirations of younger Bengalis and today are very much like those of, middle class Indians everywhere. So all of that has changed. But certainly today, Bengal is not. I mean, there's no Satyajit Ray in Bengal today. There's no Mrinal Sen. There's no Ritik Ghatok. So that has certainly that's a big difference. Bengal has become much more mainstream, if you like. In fact, even the Bangla we speak now, that is spoken now in Bengal, it has a much greater sort of Hindi influence than it used to in the past. So all of that is very striking.
Right. I mean, again, I don't want to give the book away too much, and I think people should go out there and sort of buy it, read it. But it's based a lot around this very Indian and Hindu concept, so to speak, of reincarnation and karma. And I thought it was interesting because there's almost a 50-year gap in the timelines. And again, I wanted to understand that was there some reason for it, or what does it mean, when trauma or memory takes almost like 50 years to surface or to come to terms with?
Well, first of all, I must say that reincarnation isn't. I mean, yes, reincarnation is very, very much a part of Hinduism, but it's even more, I would say, a part of Jainism and Buddhism. I mean, the reincarnation is completely built into Jain and Buddhist conceptions of the world. But also, reincarnation is a very important belief amongst many other communities. For example, the Druze of Lebanon, they are perhaps the community that takes reincarnation more for granted than any other, and they are, in a titular sense, Muslim. And similarly, in America, in the Americas, many Native American groups believe in reincarnation. I mean, actually, it's estimated by some specialists that maybe as many as 1 in 10,000 children is born with past life memories. So it's a very common phenomenon across the world. I mean, it's equally common. I mean, there are many, many such cases, documented cases in the United States and Canada, for example. So it's not geographically specific, So there are certain common patterns that occur with children who have these past life memories. That is, usually the memories they're usually very precocious, and usually the memories surface at around 3 years old. And they last for about 2 to 3 years, so they start to fade by the time the child is about 5 years old, and they generally completely fade by the time they're 7 years old. And I'm sure or have heard of children with past life memories. And I have a close friend, for example, who had past life memories when he was about 3 years old. And then they faded. But something lingers on, For some, that experience is traumatic. For some, it's incredibly fulfilling. It's an incredibly powerful and important experience because, you know, if you have past life memories, then you don't experience the world in the same way as people who don't have those memories. There are cases of actually these memories being suppressed because there's huge societal pressure to suppress these memories, but often they resurface. And you probably know that there's all this hypnotherapy about people going, digging out past life memories through hypnosis and so on. I have no views about that at all. I don't know if these therapies work or don't work, but uh, certainly it is the case that these memories can surface later. Of course, the character in my book is a special case, shall we say?
Right. Uh, so I also when I was going through this book and your earlier books as well, they're such beautifully visual books. I mean, you can almost imagine. So thoughts of sort of getting a series out of them in a world of Stranger Things. Is there something that is going to come on Netflix with the Ghost Eye?
There's no such thing, no such talk at all. Uh, um, I pride myself on writing books that are, as it were, a movie proof. So many people have tried to make movies of my books, but they never manage because actually the stories are so complex and so there's you know uh, the settings are often multinational and so on, so they're very difficult to film. And I don't imagine that this one will be.
Right. Okay. So, last questions. One is that when I was reading this book, a friend of mine who's again a big fan said, please ask him what would he like? Like he's won so many awards. And you can't say both. So awards or being read by more and more people, if you had to pick one.
Uh, um, you know, uh, I think awards can make a huge difference to writers' lives when they come early in their life, uh, and they sort of create a breakthrough like that. But my experience was not like that. In fact, as the years have gone on, I've got, I've got these awards and prizes much later in my life. So, and I've got them as my books are more and more widely read. So, at this point in my life, the greatest award is to have a grandchild. And I now have a grandson who's 9 months old. So that is my biggest award.
Congratulations. I mean, I can. So, okay. I know I said last questions, but since I have you, one is that would you like to speak to our viewers about the Future Library project and how did that come about and what's happening there?
Well, the Future Library project was started, I think, in 2014. And the idea was that they would invite a certain one writer every year to write something which would then be buried away both in a bank, in a vault in a library, and in a vault inside a forest. It would be buried until 20 until a century later. So I found this a very interesting idea because one of the big critiques that I certainly would make about modernity is that modernity exists in very short time cycles. So we all think about reflecting electoral cycles, if you like. We think of like 4 years ahead, maybe 6 years ahead, or whatever. But in the past, our ancestors used to think 7 generations ahead, hundreds of years ahead. So, I think it's important that they're trying to do this, to try and force writers and artists to think realistically about what awaits us, what awaits my grandson 100 years from now. He'll be in his 80s by the time these texts are taken out of the vaults. And it's a really incredibly interesting challenge to think of, what will the world be like? How will they reflect on the world of my time? I myself, in my own lifetime, I've seen so many incredible changes. So that, in a sense, it's almost impossible to try and divine, what awaits us.
But talking about the future, are you optimistic, pessimistic, hopeful? You write a lot about, the climate challenges we're facing. Where do you see that going?
I think if you look realistically at the world around us today, uh, I don't like this optimism, pessimism binary. I, I think that's again something that modernity has sort of implanted in us, because modernity is built around the idea that the world will always get better and better, and there'll be so-called progress. But I think if you look realistically at the world around us, things are looking worse and worse. I think we are literally, forget about climate change and all the environmental challenges. We are almost on the brink of a nuclear war.
Hmm.
So if you look at it like that, and it's very hard to see how we reclaim something salvageable from where we are now. My friend, the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben, he often says that the only thing we can do now is to ask ourselves what remains. And I think that's a question that's neither optimistic nor pessimistic, but it's a question about looking at the world in a clear eyed way. And of course, something will remain, something will remain of the world we see around us today. What it will be, it's almost impossible to tell.
But Amitav Ghosh, at this point of what remains, do we accept it? With what you do speak about in the book is, the Indian way of acceptance and karma, or do you think we can do something about it as people, as a society, as a global society, Indian society? Do you think?
Well, I like to think of the words of Antonio Gramsci, which is pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. And there, I think, in fact, our Indic notions of karma are kind of important, because really it doesn't matter what the result is. We have to keep trying to make things livable. That's really the point. That should be our karma and our dharma. To try and make things better, even if uh, we understand that, objectively speaking, that's going to be a very difficult thing.
Thank you so much on that note. You're absolutely right. I think we all have to look at our karma and our dharma. Amitav Ghosh, thank you so much for speaking to DeKoder.